Cobain's is worth the most. Dylan's considered the most historic.
Prince's guitar very much suited who he was.
This one, an ode to Prince.
I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand.
Even the Beatles strike a big chord in the Jim Irsay Collection. Meet Larry Hall, the steward of this multi-million-dollar assortment of music, history, and culture on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. And I'm pleased to be joined on the podcast this week by Larry Hall. Larry is the Vice President of Special Projects and Historical Affairs at the Indianapolis Colts. Larry, I've known you for a long time. It's great to catch up with you, and you've been a part of the Colts. I mean, I think you could be called Mr. Colt.
Oh, wow.
Because this is what, 41 seasons?
41 seasons behind me. This fall will be 42. I feel very blessed. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. It's just exciting to think back on a beautiful career, and it's not over yet, just for clarity, get that out front. But thanks to Jim Irsay, his father, Bob Irsay, and the Irsay daughters, that I absolutely love and feel, very, very close to. I started with the Colts 2 months to the day after the Mayflower landed here.
Yeah.
And back in May 29 of 84, team came March 29, and it's really been a blessing, and I'm excited to talk with you today.
I want to talk about, you look back on your career, which has been substantial, but let's go to present day. We are sitting right now in Jim Irsay's office. Okay. And I think it's not a stretch to call this a museum. I mean, this is beautiful, but what we are surrounded by here, are historical artifacts, guitars, pictures, you name it. This part of the Irsay Collection, which has been going on for a while, and you're responsible for really kind of leading that or shepherding that. Talk about your responsibilities in doing that and some of the things we're sitting around.
Sure. Well, Mr. Irsay's passion for collecting started in his childhood, really, with cards and that sort of thing. But in earnest, the collection as we know it today, really 2001, when he acquired Jack Kerouac's On the Road Scroll, which is really sort of the foundational piece for the Beat generation. And from there, over time, he really was known for collecting guitars. There's over 200, I think we're up to 227 guitars now. And the last paper edition of Guitar Magazine called it the greatest guitars in the world. So there's a cool article in there. You can still see it online. In the end, there's so much history that goes into Mr. Irsay's thinking, both in the guitar space. Really, I like to define it in three kind of separate categories, and encompasses most of them: rock and roll, American history, and pop culture. There are things from sports, but if they're sports related, typically it's because the cultural significance of those artifacts. Things like Muhammad Ali's shoes from the Thrilla in Manila, the first time he came out with a name change to Muhammad Ali. That robe is in the collection. Secretariat saddle. There's a ton of things in all three categories, and many of them I don't think everybody really knows about.
Yeah, Jim is such a fan and so passionate about music. Give me some wow guitar. You've got a lot of guitars here. What are some of the wow guitars that are in the collection?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Where do I begin? The Black Strat, David Gilmour, is one of the most famous in the world. That was a fantastic acquisition back in 2019 at Christie's. Just a packed room, and so many people were so excited about it. It came from around the world. And I'm on the phone with Mr. Irsay, bidding $100,000 a bid, and we were the recipients of the winning bid. Really, really exciting. There's several others. Prince guitar over there, a Yellow Cloud. This is actually Kurt Cobain, Smells Like Teen Spirit. He really shifted, kind of a seismic shift in how people thought about music, dress, live their lives. And then over my left shoulder, there's Tiger, Jerry Garcia's guitar. He actually played that as final concert in Chicago at Soldier Field. It took Doug Irwin 6 years to make that guitar. It's a beautiful piece, whether you're a deadhead or not.
Yeah. Talk about acquiring these. You're going out and bidding. You're doing a lot of this yourself. Talk about some of the maybe some of the exciting times crazy times and going out and getting some of these pieces?
Sure. Well, I think probably the craziest was that one I just referred to, the black strat, because there was all this buildup, and Christie's did a marvelous job of promoting it. They took David Gilmour had 127 items that he was going to auction off to benefit Client Earth, which is to help prevent climate change. And so very philanthropic on David Gilmour's part. Mr. Irsay recognized that, and I think that encouraged him to bid a little more as he went along because knowing it was going to a great cause. But Christie's took that 127 lots to London and California and then finally New York. So there was all this buildup for it, and people literally from around the world came. And I remember the auctioneer was Gemma Sudlow, and she's British and has, quite the accent. And at the very end, I'll skip to the end, she's looking down at me and I'm on the phone with Mr. Irsay. And I said, I think we got it, brother. The other guy, is capping out. And she looks down and she says, for $3.3 million here, Christie's, this is your moment. Like this. And I jumped in the air. And even though I live that, I look at the video and I think, was that really me? Did that even really happen? The word surreal comes to mind when it comes to that particular acquisition. There have been other things that have happened over time, that we've acquired things directly through the person who owned it. For example, Ron Turcotte was the jockey that rode Secretariat Saddle. His people reached out to me directly. I talked with Mr. Irsay about it. We met, once a price was agreed on, I met with Ron Turcotte in person, and he's a wonderful man, a Canadian country gentleman. It was great to hear his stories, but a lot of cool experiences over time. Some of them are more low key, like a traditional auction, we're just a little bit of a paddle up and then there's a winner and that's just it. But rock and roll tends to be more exciting than some of the other pieces, but I love American history. A lot of cool pieces in American history as well.
Yeah. Your background with the Colts for many years was running the ticket operations here. I want to talk about that. But in this newer role with the Irsay Collection, also with historical affairs. Mm-hmm. So you really are chronicling the history of one of the National Football League's premier franchises, the Indianapolis Colts.
Certainly. But to get it out up front, John Scott. John was a longtime equipment man going back to the Baltimore days. John's done a great job. He and his crew over time of keeping control of, Colts helmets and jerseys and pads. And John, while he was the full-time equipment man with his crew, kept a memorabilia room here at the West 56th Street complex. And to this day, John isn't technically full-time, but he comes in all the time. I love him. Yeah. And he really started the process of keeping track of the physical. Credit Craig Kelly, one of our original PR guys, for keeping track of all the data and the media guides and that sort of thing. So when I was asked about 7 years ago to kind of take over Colts history and the Jim Irsay Collection, there was already a pretty good foundation in place, but I wanted to aggregate some of these things. So I got with a local company to have every page of every media guide digitized. So you can go right now today to Colts.com to Team History and see every page of every media guide. We also have them for the Baltimore here as well, going back to the 1950s. There's a lot of cool things on the website specific to Colts history. I'm really proud of that. And it had a lot of help from other people. Obviously, John was critical to that. Keeping track of the things that we have from the past is really something that we value. A lot of people don't know this, but in my opinion, sort of with football specifically, there's Pro Bowl players, there's all pro players, and then people that get to wear a gold jacket, right? Those folks are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They created sort of a next tier, in my opinion, with a red jacket, the All 100 team, people that are on the All 100 team. That particular team has 2 Colt quarterbacks, 2 Colt running backs, and 2 Colt receivers, total of 10 people total, including the all-time leading scorer in the history of the league, Adam Vinatieri. And of course, a lot of people don't remember, but Don Shula coached the team. Right. He also was on the first Baltimore Colts team in 1953 as a player. Wow. Okay, so Colts history is really very, very cool. We're coming up on our 75th anniversary here soon.
Yeah. As you look around the room, and again, I know you and I talked, these are some very high dollar items. Mm-hmm. Jim Irsay's not doing this for the price tag piece of it. What are some of the prices on some of these?
So obviously, like you correctly said, he considers himself a steward of the horseshoe and a steward of this collection, and they're all priceless, right? But that's not just a cliche. That's an actual thing because as I turn back, this was 3.3 million hammer, really 4.1 with taxes and fees. Now it appraises for about $4.5 million. Yeah. The challenge is, heaven forbid, an earthquake swallows it up. Can't get another one. That's the one and only black strat used for a couple of decades by one of the greatest guitarists ever, right? Yeah. This guitar was a little under $1 million at the time of purchase. It's now 3x that, and I'd be surprised if it went to auction if it weren't a lot more than that even. There's many that are very high value. That's the most expensive. at $4.868 million. Kurt Cobain's 1969 Fender Mustang, which was an incredible auction too. That one was an interesting story. I don't like being remote, Gary, I can tell you, because you're on the phone with someone and you say, is the bid to us? Is it bid, when you're in the room, you can see and feel what's going on. And this was a phone only auction. And I had a limit for Mr. Irsay of 3.8 million. And he happened to be literally in Hawaii and unreachable. So I can't get back on the phone. If it's not going our way, I've got to make a call, and I don't like to go over what he tells me to do. I listen to him. Anyway, long story short, it goes back and forth, and they start out at $500,000. They want to get a resolution to it pretty quick. So the bid's at 3.5, and I'm asking for a cut bid, which means half, to 3.75, and they won't give it. And finally I said, listen, I've got $3.75 million right now. Please. And so finally the auctioneer agrees to take the cut bid. They have to offer the cut bid to the other person. That person did not go to 4 million. And so I was barely under the limit, and Mr. Irsay won the bid. So that was a really cool one. I think he reflects back on it and thinks that he had a little spiritual intervention to come up with a number that ended up being so close to the bid. But many things here. There's the Beatles drum kit that Ringo used as kit number 1. A little over $2 million when it was purchased many years ago. And then separate from that, a separate acquisition was just the drum head from the Ed Sullivan Show. And the things about the collection I love most is when we can find that triangulation, that triumvirate of iconic artifact, iconic person connected to it in a moment in time. Right now, it's Oscar season. The film, A Complete Unknown, is up for 8 Oscars. The guitar that's referring to is in this room right now, in that corner right there. Bob Dylan, right? Famously, Dylan Goes Electric, he's a poet laureate of a generation, right? That Mr. Irsay and I both consider that to be the most historically significant guitar in the collection. That's where the money really, it matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter because that's one of one. It's priceless. You can't get another one. That's the one that was on stage with Bob Dylan when he went electric, plugged in, and half the people cheered and half the people booed.
Yeah.
So really, really cool things. The Sullivan Show, obviously, Ringo, that Ludwig drum head. There's a number of things like that in the collection. Here again, Secretariat saddle, right? Secretariat, Ron Turcotte, the saddle itself. To this day, over 50 years have passed since 1973 when the record was set at all 3 races. The record still stands.
Wow.
Think about that. It's amazing.
Yeah. Before we go to break, all of this wonderful memorabilia, priceless, as you said. There was talk earlier about maybe a brick and mortar museum. Is that still a possibility?
There's conversations about it. Mr. Irsay, he acquires things to share them, right? We went on this, multi-city nationwide tour, had 12 huge stops everywhere from DC to Austin to LA to San Francisco, Chicago, obviously here in Indianapolis twice. So many places that he shared the actual artifacts with people for no charge, for free, and then put on an incredible rock and roll show with many Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. So right now, nothing's imminent. Certainly there'll be further discussion about that, but right now, he just loves enjoying sharing it the way he does. We also do loans with several museums. We have one coming up at the Museum of Pop Culture where 3 artifacts are headed there. I leave Monday to take them up.
Good. Much more ahead with Larry Hall. We're going to talk about a really interesting career with the Indianapolis Colts. Arrived about 2 months after the Mayflower landed here in Indianapolis. Ran ticket operations for many, many years. We'll talk about that and a lot more when the Business and Beyond podcast returns.
PNC Bank knows banking should be boring. If it wasn't, bankers might sound like movie trailers.
In a world with banks, a woman walks in, ready to risk it all.
I just want to open a savings account.
Or you could do that.
Drama is good for movie trailers, not banks. That's why PNC Bank takes a boring approach to your money so you can live a happily fulfilled life. PNC Bank, brilliantly boring since 1865. PNC Bank National Association, member FDIC. Brilliantly boring is a service mark of the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc.
And welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My special guest this week is Larry Hall. Larry's Vice President of Special Projects and Historical Affairs with the Indianapolis Colts. And Larry, we spent the first half of the podcast talking about this incredible Jim Irsay collection and some of your efforts in getting some of these items here. But most of your history, 40 plus years with the team, was involved with tickets and running the ticket operations, which is no small task. I want to get to how you got to Indianapolis because you grew up in Cincinnati, right?
That's right. Proudly from the west side of Cincy. I always say that for my west side friends.
And you were you love football, right? You played football?
Oh my goodness, I did. I played through high school. I didn't play in college, but I fell in love with football at age 5. My dad loved football, and I saw it and was just totally hooked. I'm older than the Bengals. Okay, growing up in Cincy, we didn't have a team, so I loved the Vikings because
that was your team?
Yeah, that was my team, the Purple People Eaters. I mean, when you're 5, like what's better than that?
Jim Marshall, Carl Eller, and all those guys.
Yeah, Viking Joe Cap. I mean, it went way back, but absolutely fell in love with football. So born in 1960, May 13, I'm 11 months younger than Jim Irsay, who was June 13 of 1959. And so I think that might have had a little something to do with building a tight-knit small staff around Jim. Yeah. I think there was probably a little more reason to it. Plus I came cheap. It was 1984 and I was a 24-year-old kid. I feel very blessed that the Irsay family, said, hey, this is the guy that's going to run the ticket office. At that time, no computers, we didn't take credit cards for the first 3 years here.
Wow.
I was really pleased to be able to have Sue Kelly join me along with Christy Wilsey. Christy was the first receptionist the team ever had at the old school in Fall Creek. And it was just the 3 of us for many years and only 39 employees at that time. And now we're pushing 300 full-time employees that don't wear a helmet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And your introduction to the NFL, in a sense, was you park cars.
That's right.
Right. At Bengals games and also Reds games in Cincinnati.
That's correct. So a neighbor of ours, I grew up on the west side of Cincinnati, like I said, he was the postal carrier for Riverfront Stadium and surrounding businesses. And when he wasn't delivering the mail, he was an entrepreneur. So he struck deals with Lotus the loading docks that were right around the stadium. And then he got boys in their middle to late teens like myself that lived on our street to wear matching shirts and park the cars, collect cash. We'd give the money back to Jim Cook. He'd peel off $20, $40, $60 in the mid 70s. And remember, that's the Big Red Machine era.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. And then one day Jim said, hey, look, the Bengals need somebody on game day to come in and, help them count cash, escort folks in wheelchairs. Would you want to do that? I said, it'd be great. And I did that through the end of high school and all through college, which led to a really close relationship with a guy named Bill Hedgecock. Bill was the original ticket man for the Bengals. They started in 1968. So fast forward to 1982, went to Oak Hills High School, 78 graduated from UC in 82, University of Cincinnati. And then had 2 really good job offers because I worked, my last 2 years at college, I worked full-time at a payroll service from noon to 8, 5 days a week. It was a full-time job just like everybody else that worked there, except everybody else worked from 8 to 5. And from noon to 5, I did what they did, but from 5 to 8, I could check payroll forms, do a little homework. And my mom still did my laundry, which I loved her for that, right? Because I'm a college kid, but I lived at home. I'm a very good parallel parker because I had to cruise up the hill to University of Cincinnati to find a place to park. And from that, I really enjoyed working in the ticket office. And I had 2 great job offers. I had to kind of explain to people like at Procter & Gamble and SC Johnson and Company, NCR, had 2 great job offers.
Wow, yeah.
And they said, well, how did you work full-time and I said, look, the only way it worked is living at home, and mom took care of laundry, and I just really got after it. So I had 2 good job offers, and then I accepted one with NCR. My then girlfriend became my fiance, is now my wife of 42 years. He was still working downtown Cincinnati, and so I took the job with NCR to stay close to Cincinnati. And then Bill Hedgecock called and said, hey, I'm recommending you to be the new assistant ticket manager for the Bengals. I'm going to retire. The assistant's moving up. You need to come meet with Mike Brown, his son, Paul's son. And I said, okay, great. And so I put on my blue suit and a red tie and had my resume, and I went down and I met Mike Brown, and he said, well, Larry, have a seat. Thanks so much, Mr. Brown, for seeing me. He said, well, Bill said you're our guy. And I said, that's great. Would you like to see my resume? And he goes, no. He goes, go home and think of what a fair salary would be. You'll start February 1st. And I kind of thought, what just happened, right? But what happened is, and I realized this, I've told this story many times, mostly to college students. I said, look, you interview every day. We all interview every day. And if you are the first one there, last one to leave, and you're showing great effort, you have to hope that your hard work is going to intersect at some point with opportunity. And if that's not happening and it's running parallel to, you got to find a way to make that happen. because I get asked a lot, how do I get into sports? Tell me your story. And so my story, it's probably impossible. I don't think they're going to give the keys to the car, so to speak, to a 24-year-old again. But remember, I was 11 months younger than Jim Irsay. Pete Ward's only a couple years older than that. Craig Kelly, Kurt Humphrey. There's really just 4 department heads back when we started with 39 people. So I treasure those days. They're fantastic memories. And I consider myself to be very fortunate thanks to the Irsay family.
What do you remember about your interview and how you got to the Colts?
Okay, so that was an all-day. My wife's one of 9 kids, right? And I'm one of 4. And at that time, no one had left Cincinnati. No one had left the west side of Cincinnati. We thought you needed a passport to cross the Ohio River. I'm half kidding about that. So my wife's like, she's pretty laid back. I'm pretty high energy. And she goes, well, what do you think your chances are? I go, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty young. So I came over here and I wasn't intimidated. I was working for the hometown team. I was a hometown guy. And if it didn't work out, no problem, right? So I met with 4 different people. Bob Turping was the assistant GM. Mike Chernoff was the legal counsel. Jim Irsay was the general manager. And his father, Robert Irsay, obviously was the primary owner. And at the end of this long day of interviewing with all these different folks and lunch and everything, Bob Irsay says, we want you. When can you start? And I said, well, I need to go back to Cincinnati. Talk about, well, you need to call us tomorrow and let us know. And I said, okay. And I'm driving back to Cincinnati going, oh no, I told her I didn't have much of a chance. And I walked in and she goes, well, how did it go? And she goes, I said, well, they offered me the job. She goes, what? Like she goes, she was astounded, right? And I was a little surprised too. Yeah. And even Mike Brown, God bless him, I wouldn't be here without Mike Brown, right? And Mike, when the Irsay family called the Brown family and said, hey, do you have a young guy, I was young then, with a degree and working in your ticket office that we could interview to be a lead ticket guy, he could have said no, but he didn't. He said, no, Larry, you're a Cincy guy. We love your work. You're a Bengal, but this is a chance to be the lead ticket person for a team. And obviously the guy ahead of me, Paul, was in his 40s at the time. He was going to be there for a while. I think you owe it to yourself to go talk to him. If it doesn't work out, you're a guy, you're doing great work, no problem. So kudos to Mike Brown, certainly the Irsay family. I say this all the time, I'm a lucky boy from the west side of Cincy, who's now a Hoosier for 4 decades plus.
And you arrived, again, 2 months after the Mayflower landed. So you were at the Fall Creek School.
The Fall Creek School.
The long before the Colts complex.
That's correct. And for those that don't know, Fall Creek School had been closed for at least a year or more. And so my understanding is it was destined to be torn down. So there was no money put into keeping it up. The roof leaked. The toilets might have leaked a little bit. It was not good, right? And so when I arrived, I remember the first day going in and going up to Christy Wilsey, who was the receptionist at the time. I'm Larry Hall. I'm here to do tickets. She goes, okay. Is there somebody? She goes, well, I think there's probably an open classroom down the hall if you want to. And literally, there was no computer, no staff. The Colts didn't bring anyone from Baltimore. As I understand, there were older folks probably didn't want to come here. My understanding is they thought they could use some part-time help that was working down at the old Hoosier Dome to execute the tickets. And back then, before I got here, before I had a chance to put my own input into it, they put I think it was about this size in the newspaper, a little cutout you could apply for tickets. And it was cashier's check or money order only, no credit cards, no personal checks. And in a 13-day window, 30,000 applications for 140,000 seats. And they cut it off and started sending them back, right? But they've now got 30,000 applications for 140,000 seats. The building held 60,127. I remember the number well. We found a couple other seats that we could add in later, so it went to 60,129 at one point. I remember these. The season ticket prices per game ticket would be $21, $17, and $10.
Wow.
Still remember it. The entire lower level, where Bill Hudnut famously walked in with Bob Irsay.
I was there.
Arm raised, right? The lower level and the first 9 rows of the upper level were all $21 each, so $210 for the season. Everything above that was $17 or $170 for the season. And then there were just a few seats held for single game sale around both of the replay screens for $10. Amazing and fun story. So Bob Irsay, we've got this issue, if you will. And I come over and I said, well, obviously we've got to find a way to make it equitable. And there's really no way to say first come, first serve, because there were people that literally, as I understood it, waited to get a paper at midnight to be able to then cut that diagram out with the form to fill in to send the money in. And sometimes it would be, hey, you need 2, I need 4, she needs 4. Let's put in for 10, right? And then somebody else would do that. So it was a little bit inflated, right? But not completely, because they cut it off too. So in the end, we come up with this idea, and there was no even Hoosier lottery at the time. And so Bob Irsay says, well, I know the Illinois governor. I'll get the lottery machine from him, bring it over on my jet, and we'll just draw a number out. And so we walk through this process, and we're going to go into this big press conference with like all the local media stations and all the print media. That was obviously a much bigger deal than without the internet. And Bob Irsay went to describe it all to him. And he said, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Now, has everybody got that? And to a person, they all went like this. They said, this guy's going to explain it to you. And a 24-year-old me went up and said, okay, if we draw a number out, it's number 6. We've got the list consecutively, the 6th person, the 12th person, the 18th person, all the way through until we're out of tickets. That's how we're going to do it. Everybody get it? And everybody shook their head. So I felt good about that and walked away. It was a lot of fun.
Managing tickets back then, as you mentioned, no computer and no credit cards. Didn't take credit cards.
No. Mr. Irsay said, "Why would I give 3% back to the credit card company?" And at that time, he was right, because honestly, the due date to renew your tickets, and we kind of saw what the local environment was and knew that the Indianapolis 500, obviously the iconic Indianapolis 500, century-old plus, just really, it's on the back of our state quarter, right?
Yeah.
Basketball and in motorsports. They were asking for renewals like maybe right after, the month after. So we didn't go a full year in advance. We went March 1st. So Mr. Irsay would say, look, we're going to get the checks in March 1st. If there's an issue, you can get it fixed. Why do I need to do credit cards? And finally, in the 3rd year here, I convinced him, hey, this has become a real thing. And he was using a credit card more, I think, at that time, to be able to service our customers that maybe need a little help spreading that payment out, especially companies that have larger ticket orders. So things are very, very different. We did get a computer in. I'd worked with Quantel, which is now an antiquated system that doesn't exist anymore, to my knowledge, in ticketing. There was some single game ticket things happening with Ticketron, and Ticketmaster was just becoming a thing. Long story short, we get through the first iteration of who's going to get tickets, refunding those that weren't selected, but holding their names certainly on a waiting list. Getting closer to the season, and my wife, we'd just been married a year. She stayed back in Cincy to finish her job, and I was here by myself, so I could spend all day into the night, and nobody was going, "Where were you?" That sort of thing. And in the end, she'd come over and visit some, and I'd get back there some. But as we build up to the first week, the first game, and I'm literally sleep deprived. We are doing a lot of ticketing by hand, and there were some people that we needed to thank for helping bring us here. Certainly some corporate sponsor people, some of the political folks, Mr. Hudnut, Mayor Hudnut, tons of people like that. We're keeping track of that. Literally, we had graph paper, and we would pencil in a name and do a row. It was by hand, right? And yet somehow that week, with literally, I'm not exaggerating, 3, 4, 5 hours sleep, maybe at the most, and I'm sleep deprived, and I realized, wait a minute, we didn't do a player sign-up sheet. We got to take care of the players. So Sue Kelly, who was then just a volunteer that lived in the neighborhood, became full-time with me, takes a stack of printed tickets on her lap, and she's tearing off game 1. Right? Because we got to have these tickets. We didn't give them right straight to the guys, right? There's not time. It's the week of the game, right? And I'm worried about everybody outside the building. I figure if you're inside the building, I can go around and hand your tickets to you if you're the PR guy, accountant, whomever it may be. So we get up to Anderson University, and Frank Cush was a hardcore coach. Right. It was like 3 practices a day. They hit every time. We don't need computers, 1,000 push-ups, they'll be better. That kind of mentality. He was a good guy. He was a good man. I'm not speaking poorly of him, but at the end of the day, he was tough on him. And the guys, summers were hot in Anderson.
Right.
And those 3 days caught up to him. We get into the lunchroom, and guys see it's the ticket people, right? All 2 of us at the time. And they come out of 7 wide. I mean, it's like, there's no line. I need 2 of these. I need 4 of those. And somehow, some way, and I don't know what possessed me to this day, I thought, I've got to try to get a hold of this. And at this point, all the other Colts staff, there's only 30-something people total. Yeah. They're all doing their thing. They're not in ticketing. I'm not making this up. I got up, I stood on a chair, I stood on the table, and I yelled at the team, if you guys will make 1 line, this will go a whole lot better, or we're just going to go back to Indianapolis. And I got everything from you to just go on back then. And then a big lineman went, guys, I really need these tickets. Let's make a line.
Yeah.
And you know what happened? They made a line. Now, part of me thought my then 150-pound self, some big D lineman was going to take the front of that table and go like this, and I was just going to be like flying off the back and landing on my head. And I thought, if I made it through that first week of that first season, and the 30,000 applications for 140,000 seats with a part-time staff at the Hoosier Dome doing some of it, and us doing a lot by hand, I think I'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah. For a long time, I thought that we as Colts fans were spoiled by success and years of success. But there was a lean period in those early years. What was that like? The success, the Super Bowl, all those great winning seasons were a lot of fun. But how about those lean years?
Well, the lean years were tough, but I'll go back real quick if I may. So '84, people cheered everything.
Oh,
they cheered like that first season. They were cheering everything, and then they kind of learned football more.
Yeah.
And remember, Indiana didn't change time then. Kickoff was at noon. People came from church. I'm not exaggerating this. Right now, I think we have one of the best women's fan group of any team in the league. But back then, not a lot of women followed football, right? It wasn't necessarily football state. I think it is now for sure. It has been since those golden era that you talk about. There were women that literally I saw reading books that came with their husband. They'd watch a play, but they'd go back to reading the book. I saw a woman knitting. I'm not exaggerating. 1984, full house. It was loud and people were cheering everything, right? And then to your point, the teams weren't great at the time. They weren't some of our best teams, all great guys. 5-11 seasons, that sort of thing. It made it tough, right? But so eventually, as things waned down, we had really put on the map. I think one of the things that Jim Irsay did that really put us on the map was the trade for Eric Dickerson in '87.
Right.
And of course, we go to the playoffs and we go to play Cleveland in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
That's a special memory too, because I'm an on-field guy. I'm in the offices too, and all sorts. I've been able to bless and do so many things besides ticketing. Before we had a marketing team, I did some marketing stuff. I drove Eric Dickerson to WIBC to record a radio commercial, right? And at the end, it said, "There's no place like Dome." And he goes, "That's really corny." I go, "We're in Indiana," and people remember it. In the end, a lot of cool things happened over time, and I really just feel very blessed to be here.
You talk about Eric Dickerson, the Halloween game night. That was Monday Night Football, right?
That's right. That's our first Monday Night Football game in Indianapolis. We played the Denver Broncos. Eric had 3 touchdowns in the first quarter, and just a few minutes into the second quarter, he scored his 3rd touchdown. It was electric. And the stadium, looking back on it, there's so many fond memories, but it was really tight, very small by today's standards. Like the existing Lucas Oil Stadium could hold, right? Because there's so much more leg room, concourse room, the ceiling's taller. It was great memories of that first time making the playoffs. Even going back to Cleveland real quick, I still remember, I'd been suit and tie, and Kurt Humphrey, our then our lead accountant, and I were in suit and tie, and we're going to be in the press box to watch a game. We're all excited, like our NFL team. Here we are. We've arrived. And Craig Kelly comes and goes, "Guys, there's not room in the press box." I'm like, "Well, where are we supposed to go? It's like really cold, and we're used to being inside. We're in a suit." He goes, "Look, John Scott's going to take care of you guys." We go to the locker room. We gear up, and I get to be on the sidelines in the bench area, holding like Jack Trudeau's helmet against the heater, checking the see if the chin pads are too hot to hand it back to him. And it was amazing. Like the little boy in me went, "What just happened?" Right? I mean, I was on the field with the team for that game. It's the only time it's ever happened.
Yeah.
Right now, of course, John and the guys that run equipment have a lot more help, but then we tried to be helpful because it was cold weather game. Beautiful memory.
One game I remember, I was there covering it at the time for Channel 6. It was the AFC Championship game in 95. Would that have been 95?
That's right. In Pittsburgh. That's right.
And literally the Colts were within a couple of plays of going to the Super Bowl.
Oh.
I mean, I remember being down. It was electric. It was unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And that was such a run, right? That was the letter rip years with Ted Marchibroda, God bless him, and Coach Harbaugh, who was our quarterback then, right? And really, I was down in the end zone. I wasn't in the bench area working, but I was down in the end zone with Todd Stewart, assistant equipment guy, and the goalpost is to our left. And we're looking at each other. It's going to be a hell of a story when he catches it. We're not even sure who's going to get it, but we know it's going to be a Hail Mary. The ball's in the air. And we scream. And if you asked me to bet my life on whether he caught it, I'd say yes, because I wanted him to, and I really couldn't see the ball come off Aaron Bailey's stomach. But we were a play away to use your point. And there were other plays, one or two other plays that happened with Quentin Coriat, Lamont Moore, and other players that we could have won that game. And I'm not making this up. I literally cried outside the locker room after we lost that game because I thought I could do this for 40 years and never even go to the big game, much less win it. And a cool behind-the-scenes story about ticketing, AFC Championship game. This is back when the tickets were all printed, hard copy tickets. Today's different. It's very much a digital world. But back then, you printed a hard ticket for every seat in the building, and the league for Super Bowl would send 10,000 plus tickets to the site of each championship game. If the home team wins, they stay. If the visiting team wins, they go back with the visiting team. So I'm all excited, right? I'm ready to get the two-wheeler out because it's going to be boxes of Super Bowl tickets, and I'm going to have security with me. We're going to get on the bus, going to get on a plane. We're coming back to Indy. We're going to go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And in the end, when that didn't happen, it was crushing. I have other coworkers that it's funny. You remember the wins, but just like people that play on the field, you remember the losses.
Yeah.
Remember the losses too. But, I think it makes you appreciate things more when you have things to compare it to.
Yeah.
And that's one of those times.
Yeah. On the flip side, the game against the Patriots that sent the Colts to the Super Bowl, that first Super Bowl, that had to be electric.
I honestly, I still get chills. I was fortunate to go to the Night of Champions when Peyton's production company put on with Jim Nantz and Tony Dungy and several other players. But in the end, what an amazing game. I've talked to, that's one of my favorite things is so many people that I've met, so many just regular folks like myself who love football and sharing the stories. And I would say, hey, what's your favorite Colt memory? You're a great Colt fan. And a lot of times it would be that particular game, right? That game is unbelievable. It was magical. I used to tell people, I can't put it into words, but if you looked up joy in the dictionary and there was a way to put photos of the people hugging random strangers, jumping for joy, it was electric. It was unbelievable. Additionally to that, though, people make it very personal because they're living their lives in a way that, shared memories, positive memories. And sometimes people would go back to my favorite game. I'd say, what's your favorite game? That game comes up, obviously, Super Bowl win, certainly. Fortunate to have a Super Bowl ring, thanks to the Irsay family. But take that back to, sometimes it's personal stories about going to the last time they went to a Colts game with their father before he passed away. Or it could be anything like that with a relative. But one that really stood out to me, Gary, over time is there's a man, forgive me, I can't remember his name, but he's a season ticket member for years. And back when 9/11 happened, right, which just really shook our country and arguably the world, I remember him saying to me, those are all great examples, guys. But to me, this is the man talking now, he said, the first game after 9/11, when we filled that stadium and said, we're not going to let you affect our way of life. And it makes me tear up to think about it. It really does. It's a very American thing.
Yeah. Well, you've been, Larry, such an integral part of so many highs, a few of the lows, but more highs than lows over the last 40 plus years, 40 plus seasons for the Indianapolis Colts. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us on the podcast. Thanks for all you do, not only for the Colts, but for Indianapolis and Indiana as well.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Gary.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast, a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can catch all 200 plus episodes of the Business and Beyond podcast, great podcasts with folks like Larry Hall and others, and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.